This is Rise. Let's lock in with the goal of changing one life at a time. Yours. Together, let us rise up, inspire, strengthen, and elevate our minds. It's time to rise on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, my name is Dr. Saran Heron, and welcome to Rise. Today we are going to talk about suffering setbacks in life, past traumas, and rising above them all. Dr. Frank DiMaio earned a Bachelor degree of Arts in Psychology from Providence College, a Master's of Science degree from Troy State University, and Doctorate from New York Chiropractic College. He is a transformative speaker who shares his tools to move forward from emotional lack surrounding trauma and grief. He is a published author, artist, educator who empowers individuals and organizations with his principles from emotional prosperity. His book, A Promise Made, A Promise Kept, a husband's journey through journaling to heal the loss of his spouse, is written with other husbands in mind. He is here today to share his story about major life issues from divorce, layoffs, losing his wife, and how he learned to develop ways to deal with his life. Dr. Frank, welcome to Rise here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be a guest on your show.
Now, we're going to get right into it. Now, you have a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, you hold a Master's and Doctorate, and I wanted you to just share briefly, why did you pick those majors as you did at the time that you did?
Well, the psychology degree was actually because I have a cousin who is special needs.
Okay.
Under the umbrella of that now, they call it special needs. But in the 50s and 60s, it had a totally different connotation and experience. So growing up with her was a challenge. It was hopeful. It was funny. It was tearful. It was all of the emotional roller coasters that you could imagine. But my cousin never lost a sense of humor. It was never an angry moment. There was just a smile on her face and a happiness in her heart whenever she saw anyone. So I decided that was a direction that I wanted to go in, and hence I took psychology. But like anything else, at that particular time, I really didn't know how to study.
Right.
You don't learn that right away. It's not something that they program you with through the educational process. So it wasn't until I went to chiropractic school that I really learned the principles behind learning. And so my grade GPA in college wasn't that great. So grad school was out of the question in relationship to psych. So that was the end of that. But I never lost the intent and or the desire to learn anything about psychology.
Great.
The master's degree came about after my Doctorate of Chiropractic, when Judith had gotten sick, my second wife, with breast cancer. But at the same time, she wanted to go to grad school because she was teaching on the college level, and she wanted to improve her educational learning capacity. So I had to take the GREs with her because she was so scared to death. So I had to sign up, pay for the fees, and sit there in the room with her and take the GREs. And the next thing I knew, I was applying to Troy State for a Master's in Science degree.
Wow, amazing journey towards all your wonderful degrees. Now, we're going to talk about ways to get past trauma, so we're going to get right into it. Now, you have had some traumas that happened to you personally, such as a divorce and layoff. Do you want to share that with us?
Well, it wasn't so much a layoff as it was my closing my practice.
Right.
That was because of weightlifting. I used to power lift. Because you wouldn't realize that or recognize that if you look at me now. But back then, I enjoyed that. But ironically, I herniated 3 discs powerlifting, and took 18 months to get back on my feet, and eventually lost my practice because I was a solo practitioner and a hands-on practitioner. There were other techniques that were more soft tissue, but I wasn't one of them. That was the end of that.
Now, you got married to your second wife, and later you both discovered that she had breast cancer. Could you share with us, if you could bring us back to that moment, like how did you discover that she was ill, and how was that time?
That's a good question. It was kind of funny. We had just purchased our first home together, and that was an exciting time for us. So she had put off her mammogram for 3 months, and we were sitting on the couch in the living room, and she said, I had to go get my breast pressed into pancakes. And I made a wisecrack, and she just punched me in the arm, and that was the end of that. But I said, look, honey, it's all going to be fine. You do this every year. You're always fastidious about this. It's like, not doing soap yet, so you're late, 3 months, not a big deal. It's going to be fine. Okay. So she goes, and then they tell her that there's something going on with the breast, and one thing led to another. Biopsy came back positive, and was for an aggressive form, and that was the beginning of the end. But we were partners, and it was a devastating emotional moment. I don't wish that on anyone, although everyone does lose a loved one at some point in time in their lives. But I think from the standpoint of a husband's position, it's more so traumatic than anything else. It was for me, at least.
And I'm just thinking, especially when you're not able to do anything about it. You can't change that result or that mammogram result.
No, and as a physician, your job is always to do the best that you can to try to improve a person's health or to correct the situation that they're suffering with. And it was a moment of unable to fix the unfixable. And that threw me into a spiral emotionally, especially after she passed. That was enough. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back.
I can only imagine. Now, in terms of additional trauma, you were also involved in a car accident at 20 years old, and you spent some time in the hospital. Talk to us about that incident. Bring us back to that moment as well, because we are talking about, past traumas. And how did you get through that time as well?
Well, we all have issues in our lives of learned behaviors and restrictions and things that are, no, you can't do that, no, don't do this, and you sit and don't be heard, and that kind of thing. But that particular, I was working 3 jobs. I had just completed my first year of college, and I was coming home, going back to my parents' home. Fell asleep at the wheel and hit a tree. Next 3.5 months was devastating, but a tremendous amount of head injury, trauma to the face, compression fractures of the femur, the forearm, heel, knees, internal organs, heart bruised, 4 broken ribs. I think from what I was told, I was asked a couple of times.
Right.
Brought back, asked, brought back. Ask me, I don't remember a thing.
Right. Well, that seems like a hard time.
I know, but the residual emotionally and mentally at that age is like, you have this ego that you can do anything. Mm-hmm. You're invincible.
Right.
And I was far from invincible. I was lucky that I survived.
Well, we're glad that you survived, and you're here to share your story that no matter even a car accident, right, after all that trauma, you're still here. Now, part of your healing includes journaling. Why is this so therapeutic for you, and how has it helped you emotionally?
Well, it gave me an opportunity to understand my emotional disquiet. It forced me to view my emotions on paper. So we use our senses to incorporate or try to understand what we're being exposed to in our environment. So the journaling, putting a pen to paper, even though it was difficult for me to get started because I'd tap the table, twirl the pen, for, I guess, maybe 5 weeks. Judith, she just jumped right in. I mean, she had like 30, 40 pages of a journal written before I even drew stick figures in mine. But, that was the way it went. I mean, I'm just not accustomed to doing that form of expression. I used to draw on things, that was my forte. But, the journaling, once I started to put it on paper, I had the sense of touch. I had the visual sense of input. I also had audio because I could read it. So suddenly I was able to get a sense of the emotion that was coming out of me. And as morbid and morose as it was still at least coming out.
Right.
And that was the great thing because it transforms. I mean, eventually it transformed my negative vocabulary into a vocabulary with positive intention. That was a little ways down the road. But initially, it was just a pouring out of my heart.
You are listening to Rise on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Saran Heron, and today we're talking to Dr. Frank DiMaio, earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Providence College, a master's degree from Troy State University, and a doctorate from New York Chiropractic College. He is a transformative speaker who shares his tools to move forward from emotional lack surrounding trauma and grief. He is a published author, artist, educator who empowers individuals and organizations with his principles for emotional prosperity. His book, A Promise Made, A Promise Kept, A Husband Journey Through Journaling to Heal the Loss of His Spouse, is written with other husbands in mind. He is here to share his story about major life issues from divorce, layoff, losing his wife, and how he learned to develop ways to deal with his life. Now, Frank, I know we've been talking and you mentioned about journaling and it helping you as you journey throughout towards your healing rather. Now, as a man, part of what made your healing difficult was because you were a male. You felt that you had no support. Why did you have that feeling?
Well, growing up in the 50s and 60s, we learn about being heads of family through example. And that's from mentors like my dad, my uncles, my grandfather. They presented an image to me through what they did. And that's what I put in my toolbox. I call it my toolbox because that became a interesting concept for me when I started to do speaking on the issues of emotional prosperity. But we're not trained per se to be patriarchs of the family. We learn by example.
Absolutely.
So that's what went by the wayside, essentially. I mean, it worked great when, the ups and downs, the emotional things, the arguments, the trying to discipline, all of that. You can deal with that. Those are things that are fixable. You're the patriarch, you listen, you have answers, you're protective of family. But there was no protection for me after Judith passed away or even got diagnosed with her breast cancer. That was a different avenue of I didn't want to go, but you end up there. And those tools that I learned from my dad and my uncles and my grandfather had no value.
Right.
In being able to, like I mentioned earlier, try to fix the unfixable, right, which was to try to help my wife get through this disease.
Now, over the years, you have had to look back in your past, look at the root of your own personal trauma, and seek counseling, which later you also became a facilitator for them as well. Share that journey with us during that time period where you had to also do some healing and some work for yourself.
Yes, well, that was 8 years after Judith passed away. When you hit emotional bottom, it's like being an alcoholic and you're in the gutter. You have no place further down to go. You can only go up. But one of the 5 things that I wrote about in the book was surrendering and getting help. And that's what I was able to do. I got referred to a facility for peer group counseling in Ontario, Canada, in Humber College. Of course, when you start to delve into your past, you don't necessarily see things, but you see things of how you are in the moment.
Yes,
but you don't make a connection about how you are in the moment as to what you experienced as a child. And you're very close together. Your inner child, you carry that with you from those early youth traumas. They stay with you. And they become part of what you could call your default emotion. And that's what I was forced to face.
Right.
It was not easy.
I can only imagine. Now, in terms of one's environment, you also believe one's emotional environment is important. Why do you consider this so critical as you've shared your experiences and different trauma? You also suffered from post-traumatic disorder. Do you want to?
Yeah. When you have multiple head injuries, it wasn't at that time when I was much younger, and playing sports in high school and falling out of trees and tripping off fences and hitting my head. Never realized that trauma is going to have an impact on what's between your ears.
Right.
And that keeps me awake at night. That changes my abilities to be vocal from a standpoint of proper explanation, because sometimes you could be on a very distinct pattern of thought and suddenly just not be there.
Right, you lose it.
It's like if you were a service person or a first responder. There are things that occur during the process of your journey that leave an indelible mark. And a word, a sound can trigger that, can trigger or prompt, which I use very readily, can prompt that emotional response, which is a primal thing. It's sympathetic. It's fight or flight.
Right.
It's genetically there, you just explode.
Now, for our listening audience, whether college students or just anyone that is listening today who is hearing your story and may have had similar experiences, what do you want to say to them to encourage them?
I would say start a journal, number one. Number two, don't change. Don't attempt to change your experience of an emotion, but accept it. Analyze it, where it's coming from. How is it affecting your body? These are important aspects of understanding, because once you do that, you don't push to try to change. The acceptance is allowance, and you give that emotion its space. Allow it to be what it is so that you can be with it.
And let's talk about coping. So you believe that your trauma helped you to make you a better person today. How would you say that your journey, your healing made you a better person?
I learned to forgive myself.
Yes.
That was probably the most important thing for me to recognize. Because when you can do that, you begin to, what I call the 3 A's. You acknowledge your emotion, you assimilate it, and then you accept it. So you're giving it its due, like I said, to be and to be with.
Right.
It's very important.
Now, many individuals may feel like, okay, they have trauma that has affected their lives many years ago. I don't need to deal with it. However, you believe that your past could drag into your future if no change occurs. Talk to me about that. Give me an example of that, if you don't mind.
Well, I haven't said that in a long time. And a good example would be, I can't play the piano. Or I'm not good enough playing the piano to be in a piano contest.
Right.
So you're creating a negative environment for yourself. And if you look at that, if you listen to what you're saying,
right,
you're just trying to push an emotional response and change something that you can't change.
Right.
But you can choose a different path. And if you say, I choose to practice more in my piano so that tomorrow I might have the skills to be in that competition. And so you're presenting yourself with a process rather than pushing something to say, I got to change. Because trying to do that, it's not going to happen. It's self-defeating.
You are listening to Rise on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Saran Heron, and today we're talking to Dr. Frank DiMaio, earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Providence College, a Master's of Science degree from Troy State University, and a Doctorate from New York Chiropractic College. He is a transformative speaker who shares his tools to move forward from emotional lack surrounding trauma and grief. He is a published author, artist, educator who empowers individuals and organizations with his principles for emotional prosperity. He has written the book, A Promise Made, A Promise Kept, A Husband's Journey Through Journaling to Heal the Loss of His Spouse, is written with other husbands in mind. He's here to share his story about major life issues from divorce, layoffs, losing his wife, and how he has learned to deal with his life. Now, Dr. Frank, as we've been talking and we've been talking about trauma, I want to talk a little bit about your book. You wrote a book, A Promise Made, A Promise Kept, A Husband's Journey Through Journaling to Heal the Loss of His Spouse. Now, and you also wrote that with other husbands in mind who may have lost their wife. Now, tell us about that journey. I know it took you a few years to write that book, but tell me about that journey and what can our readers expect from the book that you have written?
As far as the journey for having written the book, it was based on my journaling. And as I mentioned earlier, everything that I had written was very morose. But I put it into a book form. And I completed that after I completed my sail to and from Bermuda to raise funds for breast cancer awareness. So once I had done that, and I actually sat down and read it as a manuscript, I hated it. It's like, no, I can't publish this. This is nuts.
Right.
So I put it in what I call deep storage, in a box in the ground, if I could bury it someplace that I wasn't going to accidentally come across it. And it stayed there until 2019. And I rewrote it, realized that, my intention for putting it on paper in the first place was for the husbands, and they deserve to read my journey. And if it resonates with them, then there are elements within the book that are very helpful.
Now, if our listeners, those who are listening, want to connect with you, how can they get in touch with you? Could you share that information?
Certainly. My email address is fjad.writer@gmail.com. The website is fjdwriter.com.
Now, Go ahead, Dr. Frank. I'm sorry.
And they can drop me a line if they have questions regarding the radio program, what I mentioned or said. I'd be happy to address them.
Amazing. Now, with all that you've been through and our listeners who have been listening to the program today, if you had to leave one piece of advice as we're getting to wrap up the show with the individuals about not giving up due to trauma in their life, what would you say to encourage them at this moment?
That in itself is a wonderful question. And I would offer you a quote by Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. And I say the habit end of it is the most important, because habit, to me, I have an acronym. Healthy attitude can initiate behavior that can instigate or initiate thoughtfulness. And if you can apply that on a daily basis, you're good to go.
Wonderful. I thank you so much, Dr. Frank, for being here. I'm Dr. Saran Heron. It's important to heal from your traumas in life, from your past, and not bring them into your future. Ensure you seek out the right tools to heal, surround yourself with the right support, and let us empower others by sharing your own journey. Remember, you can rise above all setbacks and live a better and meaningful life once you put in the work. Blessings to you all. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Rise, available wherever you listen to podcasts, and always right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.